So if you're coming back on YouTube, hi, my name's Glenn Ford, here with Rule of Carnage with Mike Hutchinson. We're both game designers, and we're going to talk a little bit about, in my case, running a Kickstarter. I've run 3 successful Kickstarters now, raising over £30,000. And Mike's going to talk a little bit about getting an idea, pitching an idea, getting it picked up by a publisher. He successfully had Gaslands, one of the best-selling game from Osprey Blue Books. Certainly in the top.
I believe so, but I
certainly the top elite, and then had that rerun as Gaslands Refueled. He's had A Billion Suns picked up, so he knows a certain amount about the pitching process. So I'll open by talking about what it's like to run a Kickstarter and how maybe you go from having a basic prototyped version through to something that you can launch on Kickstarter and actually get manufactured, hopefully. So a little while ago, we had Gaslands was out, it was doing well. I decided personally that if I had some of the tools to help build a game like Gaslands, that maybe I could do something sort of off my own back. And I decided to design a game for Kickstarter. And this is one of the first thing I'd say, and it's something that I've sort of written about a few times in my blog. Running back to what I was saying earlier is, hopefully, if you're a game designer, then hopefully ideas for games are relatively cheap to you. Launching a Kickstarter is not cheap. Okay, there's investment there, there's money you've got to churn into it. If you've got a list of 10 game ideas, all of which excite you, all of which are interesting to you, there's a really important, the best thing you can do for Kickstarter is to think about which of those ideas is going to work best for you, for what you want to do, and what you have available to you to go and Kickstarter with. So
do you mean that in terms of what game idea is going to suit that platform and that kind of campaign structure best, or do you mean which one is small enough or simple enough that I can, at least for my first Kickstarter, I can give myself the best chance of success rather than creating something sprawling and creating a load of risk that one piece of the puzzle falls to pieces?
I mean, I would say ideally both. I'm a big believer that what is successful or worthwhile on Kickstarter depends on you and what you want from your project. And if you want a project that's going to, start a business and pay your rent and et cetera, for the next year, it's going to need to be need to be a big boy, and you're going to need to invest a lot into it up front. And so you're going to need a game that's going to be able to carry a lot of artwork. It's going to be able to go in a big box. It's going to be, and you're going to need to get a team behind you. And there's nothing wrong inherently with doing that for your first game. If you've got the know-how to put a team together, if you've got experience in some of the logistical areas, if you've worked with an art development team, all those sorts of things. I'm not saying don't do that as your first Kickstarter, but if you don't have those skills, I didn't have those skills, being a bit more realistic, having a Kickstarter that funds on day 28 to £6,000 is not a failure. If that's what you were shooting for, if that's what you intended, then you have succeeded. A Kickstarter doesn't need to, launch a career that's going to pay your rent to be a success. It needs to print it. I would say for me, at the minimum level, it needs to print a game. It needs to cover the costs that you incurred for printing the game, and have something that you can then later on sell at conventions or go, put on a website and will pick up some profit in the future. So long as it comes out revenue neutral, and so long as you were happy to do it and you learned something, that's a reasonable minimum. And the point is that you need to look, I think, with quite clear eyes about the ideas you might be putting on Kickstarter, and you need to say, okay, my big box legacy game is not the thing that I have the tools to approach. So when I first went to Kickstarter, I had a sort of a list of games, and I picked out a game called SSO because it had multiple things that were going to make my life as easy as possible on Kickstarter. And there are plenty of games that I love just as much. And it doesn't have to be some sort of cold, oh, the corporate giant comes in and won't let you pursue your dream. If you only have one dream for a game, if you only have one game idea, again, there's nothing wrong with that, but you're not going to pay your rent through games designing. You're not going to make a profit games designing. You're going to make one thing that is your great dream, and you're going to love it, and you're going to put it out at whatever level you want, and pursue that. And you might end up taking that through Kickstarter, but that is not a path that is going to break even, frankly, because that's your love and that's your hobby, and you're going to do that because you love it, and that's absolutely great. But that's not right, I'm going to put a game into the world and I've got 20 ideas, I'm going to pick one.
So calling a little bit back to our previous chat about how you get started and how you go through the early stages of the process. So you say that you had 10, whatever, some reasonable list of game ideas that from which SSO emerged as a kind of logistically tight product that could be a fairly low risk first attempt on Kickstarter. How far down the line of development were you with SSO when you sort of started to make this decision towards Kickstarter? Are we talking about, week 3 of the design process, or had this been something that you've been kind of cooking away for months, maybe a year or so, alongside another set of projects, and it was like Kickstarter called to you and you went to your locked desk drawer of projects and selected one? Or was it much earlier than that? What's the sort of the timeline, at least for that first one?
I mean, I know exactly when it was, because I was developing a game to just print and launch myself. And SSO was basically a game that I could print and just sell at conventions or whatever for about the same as fitting a new kitchen. And then you suggested using Kickstarter. It was a very, very, very long way down the process. I wasn't going to use Kickstarter. I didn't know Kickstarter. I'd never been on Kickstarter. And then you, Mike, said, why don't you Kickstarter it? And I started researching it. And I'll say, in all honesty, knowing a lot more about Kickstarter than I do now, I was arguably not properly prepared to launch a Kickstarter, but I had a game.
That's the most common thing said about people's first Kickstarter campaign.
No, absolutely. And I
also
think
the same thing you say about having children, by the way. I was not adequately prepared for this child.
I mean, I think you can be adequately prepared, but I think that having I very much believe that having a game that inherently made my life easier was what made my first Kickstarter successful. And over 500 backers for a first Kickstarter is a very good, solid, a Kickstarter run, which is what SSO got in the end.
Out of interest, other than just listening to Mike, because his pearls of wisdom are always worth listening to, what was the thing that sort of swung your mind on the Kickstarter? Was it the financial element in terms of, okay, so I don't necessarily have to put a bunch of cash up front, or was it the potential for exposure and visibility? What was the sort of thing that swung your mind on it?
It's the exposure and the visibility, and I think it remains the thing that is most valuable to small independent developers about Kickstarter. The footfall that Kickstarter gives you, the sort of the eyes it gets on your game, there is nothing like it that you can get for the same price as a small independent.
And the fact that footfall can convert very, very easily into some pounds in your pocket, even if they're theoretical at the time. I think that's one of the things that's very intriguing, is that there's lots of other ways of communicating the fact that you have a new game that might be coming soon, and that it's going to be great and it's going to suit you as a player. but there's very few calls to action in all of the other
Mhm.
places that you can do to tell people that. If you start a website, if you start a Facebook page, if you are at conventions with a prototype, like there's nothing that people can do other than go, wow, yes, that's really exciting. Whereas Kickstarter
Mm.
goes, here's a big button that you can put your credit card into, and that I think
Absolutely.
is the magic part of it, because then your new potential players are in some way emotionally invested
Mm.
in your product and in your game.
Yeah, and I think for me, Kickstarter didn't make SSO happen. I was going to make SSO happen myself, but without Kickstarter, I wouldn't have made Moonflight, and I wouldn't have made Rage for Montalbano, and I wouldn't be on the projects I'm now on. I would still be selling SSO, and and certainly with the lockdown, I wouldn't have gotten close to selling out that first print round, and I wouldn't have recouped those losses, and I wouldn't have done another thing. It's Kickstarter meant that SSO was revenue neutral on the day that I sent out the first copy of SSO, and that meant that when I invested money into Moonflight, into the artwork and such like, I wasn't digging myself into a deeper hole that I hadn't recouped with the first game. I was back on sort of level ground, and the first game was bringing in money that was helping for the next one. And then eventually, you get together a bit of a product line, and that's when you start going into distribution, and it actually starts sort of paying a teeny amount of profit out after a few games.
So to somewhat segue then, there's another strategy for attempting to bring your game to market without colossal financial risk to yourself. And Kickstarter is certainly one of them, although it carries some risk. But the route that I chose, and I can talk a little bit more about why I chose this route, was to attack a more traditional route and go for a publisher and try and find somebody who wanted to publish my game for me, and so I wouldn't have to invest any money in producing the thing. It would just be somebody else's problem, and I would sit there earning my royalty checks.
Just having money, people throw money at your head as you
Yeah.
lay upon a bed of silk.
And so for me, I don't know when it became apparent, but I suppose at some point it became super apparent to me that the thing that I loved doing was constructing and designing and developing games, and that was something that I did alongside an extremely busy and stressful day job. And what I didn't want to do was learn a bunch of other stressful and confusing things around producing physical product, distribution of physical product, marketing of product, because the thing that I wanted to do was really clear to me, and I already paid my mortgage with my day job, and that was stressful and confusing enough without having to fiddle my evenings with stuff that wasn't games design. So in a way, I'm extremely lucky because I actually had a pretty clear ultimatum with myself, which was I'm either going to publish the games that I write through publishers so that they do all that stuff, or I'm simply not going to publish them and I will just keep doing it as a hobby, because the only thing I want to do is the games design thing. So I was lucky enough to land a publisher with Gaslands, and that's allowed me to kind of move into this next phase, and that maybe changes the equation a little bit, but not very much. It's still like, if I was going to bring something out in an independent way, it would still have to be in collaboration with somebody who cared to do some of the things that I don't want to make additional time in my life to understand. And so what I did was I thought, well, I want to get a book published. Surely I should start pitching it as novel writers pitch. And I asked a couple of colleagues and friends who have pitched books. I worked with somebody who had successfully pitched a software development manual to O'Reilly and got that published. And I have an uncle who's worked in publishing for many years, and so I asked him, when you get requests into your publishing company, what do you do? And I asked some friends of mine who are kind of creative writing graduates, like, what did they teach you about how to get a novel pitched? And all of the advice seemed to orbit around pretty much the same thing, which is there's at least the way that I understood it, there's a relatively predictable structure for what you need to send, and then there's a pretty coherent set of tactics for like who to send it to. And so the thing that I chose to send, and it failed a number of times, and I can go into a little bit about that, was essentially an abstract, a sort of 200 words that says, this is what my game / book is and why it's exciting. And I had to really pack in a lot of sort of exciting, high impact things. So it's not a dry description of the mechanics of the game. It's like straight in with like, you know, exploding cars and, you know, dragons chasing magic carpet wizards all over the place. Imagine that's happening and how exciting that's going to be. And so the 200 words there is to try and get across both the sort of theme and the narrative excitement of your game, but also why this is a game that you have to play versus anything else that you've played, which is totally boring. And so 200 word abstract. And then I provided a chapter listing, which basically said to the publishers, I have an understanding about what this manuscript will look like, and therefore it's not like I've never encountered a rule book before. It's like, you know, it's going to have the setting, and then it's going to have the movement phase, and then it's going to have the shooting phase, and blah, blah, blah. So that they can also see roughly how long the manuscript is going to be. Is this going to be a little tiny micro game thing, or has he really got, you know, deep sets of chapter headings about, you know, exploring 6 different cities and all of the different weapon options that are available from the populace of those cities or whatnot. And then the final part was I also had, because as we've been talking about in previous conversations, I had digital prototypes, had PDFs of the rules ready to go. I was able to, I guess in novels you would call it like a sample chapter, but I had prototype versions of the rules ready to go. So if people wanted to look, they could look and they could see, oh, this guy can actually write a coherent sentence and can punctuate things, and it looks sensible and real. And so that set of elements, I think, was what has not always been successful, but that's for me what a successful package looks like.
I don't know if if you want to say, but for people who have tried to pitch something and have had it turned down, do you want to say a rough number on how many things you have pitched and had turned down, just so that people don't feel too horribly crushed when they're struggling? And I'd say, and again, it's up to you, but if you can maybe speak to how many things you've pitched post being the author of Gaslands and had turned down.
Oh yeah. No, you'd be surprised. It doesn't necessarily get any easier. There was no 10 book deal for Mike from Offspray.
Yeah, because so yeah, a lot of the time I get people at conventions who ask me, you know, how to get into the industry and how, you know, to get that first step in. And I think that, you know, dealing with a lot of rejection is the first step to it. So you've been successful, you've also been rejected. Do you just want to say a little something about how you deal with when you get turned down by a publisher and what the first steps are when you finally get accepted?
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard. It just is. You're sort of like the rational part of you is like, okay, so this isn't right for you right now. I want to understand what is, because maybe I've just pitched the wrong thing or I've pitched it in the wrong way. But that's the rational part. Like, there is definitely still a kind of underlying frustration of like, why can't you see the genius of this thing that's right in front of you? You fools. And I think the simplest advice is just to keep going. Like, it's the thing that everyone says, but like, you're going to have to be rejected 20 times before you get accepted at a minimum. So you just need to crack on spiking those rejection letters on the metal spike next to your writing desk as fast as you can. I think like what's really critical is understanding who you're approaching. So I didn't pick Offspray at random. I made a big list of all of the publishers that were publishing war games. I went through my collection, I went through the internet, and then I chose a smaller list from that list, which was like, okay, these people seem to publish standalone games that don't necessarily have a bunch of miniatures behind them, and there was a few companies like that, and so I just started emailing them first to simply ask permission to submit something. So I never submitted something straight away. I asked permission, do you accept submissions for game ideas? And that allowed me to take even that smaller list and make it even smaller, which is the people that bothered to get back and said, yeah, we consider submissions from here to there. Like, boom, now I've got somebody's email address, we've made a personal connection, I'm a polite person, so that when I send something in, it's pretty guaranteed to be read. And the other thing is that you need to be really aware of who you're pitching to. So understanding that company's product line, understanding the kinds of products they put out, like not just pitching something wildly inappropriate that they would never publish. Like it was also part of getting a successful pitch was being respectful of their business and their product line and kind of speaking directly into that, because then you make life easy for them, because ultimately at the end of the day, in Offspray's case, Phil has to pitch something into a larger team to get that signed off. In the case of some other conversations which didn't end up happening, but were ongoing for around the same time, it was a case of a small team that has to make, they have a small team, a small company, they need to bet some of their financial welfare on your game. So you have to be really respectful about the fact that this isn't about you, this is about what they're comfortable to do with their small wargaming company. All of the companies are small, and so you have to focus on that respect and also building that personal connection. And I think that's where conventions and in-person networking can be really valuable, as long as you are asking them about themselves and asking them about their company and their processes, rather than just coming in hard and being like, I've got this game about wizards, you should buy it. So yeah, I think that's mostly what I would advise.
Fantastic.
But also, like, I just had the good luck to get picked up. Like, I don't think that I had some specific set of arcane sorcery that enabled this to be a one and done. It was a matter of luck. I got a rejection from Offspray and I turned it into an acceptance through a number of like careful kind of emails and explorations. But
but you've got to know that first stage of you've got to know the first stage of how to get yourself into the position to be lucky.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, so yeah, I think we've chatted a bit about some of the early parts of the process, working it through, talked a little bit about some of the ways you can get a game sort of physically into the world. Wherever this gets posted, there's going to be a comment section. If anybody would like to go into a little bit more detail into one or another part of the process, you want to talk us more about the process of pitching, if you want us to go into more of some of the ways you can work through a Kickstarter, please let us know in the comments. If there's anything that you'd like us to ramble on about, let us know in the comments. We'll try to get to every part of everything eventually at some point, but if there's something you're interested in, we'll get to it a little bit earlier.
Where can people find you on Twitter?
At Mannequin Games 1, I think is my Twitter handle.
Nice. If you want to ask any questions or suggest any topics, then I'm Crikey Miles on Twitter. Please hit me up.
Yep. So there'll be links on wherever this is to our various websites. Certainly my website has links through to all of our social media. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. There'll be a comment section wherever you're seeing this or wherever you've downloaded it from. So let us know what you're thinking, what you'd like us to talk about, what you're interested in. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you all again on the next episode of Rule of Carnage. Thanks for talking to us, Mike.
Always a pleasure, Glenn.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.